All right, I'm here with Aaron Storm today. We are going to talk to him about his work, how it's been affected by the pandemic, and just kind of learn a little bit about Aaron and how he's dealing with everything. Hey, Aaron.
Hey.
So go ahead and just kind of tell us about your work and kind of what your initial path before everything happened was going.
Yeah, so up to this point, got my BFA at the Kentucky College of Art and Design, did a residency at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. My work has dealt around, or has worked with and around queer theory, this idea of semiotics, deconstruction, and sort of queerness as this act of like tearing something apart and reassembling the pieces into like something that hasn't been before, and something that sort of like defies binary structures in like the biggest ways possible. So I was working with a lot of image-based media, a lot of photography, traditional and digital, and then broke into some sculptures, working with silk as this idea of like a physical structure that subverts binary ideas. Sort of making these like vessels that leaked over time, to find this like poetic incontinence in sculpture.
Nice.
Yeah, and like I was really, really invested in like textiles, sort of like the history and cultural applications of textiles. And then out at the ranch started working with this idea of like extracting chlorophyll, to do these like reductive contact prints, because it's a really volatile pigment that's destroyed by the sun. And so I've been starting to work with that more here in quarantine.
Nice.
And so sort of up to this point, those are the two main threads, sort of image making and sculpture making, with silk and queerness. Gay fabric.
And fabric, yes. I've noticed that you've been doing a lot of yarning and spinning.
Yeah.
Also, I've noticed that you've kind of moved from still photography and stuff into like video as well. So can you kind of talk about that momentum?
Absolutely. So we sort of like came into video sideways. I have, of course, like the super stereotypical love of film.
Yeah.
But was never like, I'm going to be a filmmaker. But then in 2017, I took a workshop with Julie Winokur, who's Ed Koshy's wife.
Nice.
They run Talking Eyes Media together, which is this incredible sort of journalism and documentary filmmaking venture. And it was like, oh, cool, like I need to be making video. Just because like it is a logical progression from photography, just a million tiny photographs.
Yeah.
And I love sort of like the way images break. And there are different avenues for breaking images inside of video, and different like trompe l'oeil that can happen, and different like, it's just a different thing. And I have a background as a dancer, and so sort of this like integration of movement and image was fascinating to me. And it just like is super soothing to like work as an editor. I love that more than I love shooting. And to just like reassemble the pieces and like make these collages out of moving image. And it's super, super fun.
Yeah, you seem to like, because a lot of your still photography like tells a narrative as well. And when you're using the moving image in it, you kind of like create this new narrative from almost the same type of compositions, which is very interesting. So
yeah, for sure. It's been really fun working with this idea of like my body twice in a space, as sort of these like fictitious romantic partners.
Mm-hmm. They're all self-portraits as well, right?
They're all self-portraits.
Yeah, so you're like kind of telling this romance with yourself. It's very amazing. I love it.
Sweet. That makes me really happy.
Okay.
Like, this is sort of the first time in my life where I'm working outside of an art space and without like constant critique and feedback.
Yeah.
And it's like super intimidating.
It's
just like
real world scary as fuck, right?
Like, yeah. I have no idea whether or not I'm like hitting the mark, missing the mark, if I'm getting close. So I'm just like making things and putting them out there. And I'm like, oh, fuck. Like, I hope this is okay.
I feel like it's kind of teaching everyone how to like maybe not be so critical about their own work and just kind of make things and put them out there and just see the feedback that happens. So
yeah, for sure.
It's been interesting to see a lot of different people's kind of progression through just the last month of like not being able to be in a workspace or like in a space where you're constantly receiving feedback from people and just making things on their own.
Yeah. For like the first 2 weeks or so, that was like totally fucking paralyzing to me.
Oh yeah.
So I was like, oh God, like, because I've been working out of this like community studio space in Denver,
Okay.
where like it's not formal academic critique that I normally thrive off of, but there's still like a give and take of ideas and like sharing space with other artists. And then like locked in my own home with a romantic partner and like a best friend roommate, I was like, oh my God, like I'm gonna die. These people are like watching me make work, and like I have no way, no one's gonna like tear me apart if I need to be torn apart, and no one's gonna like feed my ego when I want that. So I have to like just make shit.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. And then also doing it around people who, like, I guess you probably, I know they see your work, but to see your process, like, more so, right? Like, it's not,
Yeah.
like, it's weird to kind of expose the way you make work to people that normally wouldn't see the things.
It's the most horrifically vulnerable thing
really
I have ever done.
Yeah, it becomes like a performance within itself when you're not trying to make it a performance, but it becomes that thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the exact opposite of like my favorite like 3 a.m. alone in the studio moments. For it to be like noon with like my partner watching me edit photos over my shoulder. Waiting until everyone goes to bed and I can like clean the kitchen and then like do these horrible like plant science experiments.
You're just like sitting up, like they come in, there's like this little light of you just like staring at like who's coming over my shoulder.
My roommate the other night, I was like working on a new photo, like the same series that's been going on, and he like walked past the kitchen in the middle of the night to me like standing naked on the counter. He was like, "Hey girl."
It's amazing.
It's like, this is quarantine.
Yep. Yeah. It's really funny how like all these things, like, I guess kind of like make you realize that, I mean you kind of maybe think it's like an embarrassing moment, but like it's what we do, so like should it be an embarrassing moment? Like,
right, like
why does the space in which you created in depend on the people which is in it? The outcome is always different, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, it kind of limits
for
what you're supposed to do or able to do.
Because it's like not embarrassing, because this is like what we've done for like a decade or more.
Yeah. So we do it all our lives, and now that we have to do it with around people that we have to spend like not art time with, it's just like this weird moment in which happens.
Yeah,
it's like
it's breaking down walls that like I really loved to have. I liked those walls.
It is nice to have that barrier to stand behind. Like now, like when you talk about your work and people, like they just like like they know what you're doing, so you're like, fuck, I don't know what to tell you because you've seen me do it. So to explain what's going on inside my head while I'm making these things just seems to open up another barrier, which
for sure. Especially because like I for so long have worked with these ideas of like solitude, like loneliness, the sort of like melancholy of being a queer person from the Midwest, where like there aren't like necessarily like networks you can access. And like so like making work in solitude like made sense to me, and then like being here like surrounded by people, like I've never had less alone time.
It's weird because we always kind of think of ourselves as like social people, right? Like, and then when it comes to the part of actually making, the process of making, like you don't ever want to be social.
No. Like I want to be like in a secret mountain cabin.
Oh yeah, you need to lock yourself away in some type of like room where no one else can see you and do these things where like you have the freedom to express yourself without judgment. And it's weird to not have that, or at least to have that thought. I don't know, because I'm not sure we ever actually have that. It's just that the idea of that is, I guess, what helps us set our minds for
right. And there are all of these like bullshit, super heady ivory tower ideas about like the artist and the process.
Yeah.
And like if like, oh shit, like if I'm observed during my process, like has the process been changed just because like someone has observed me?
Yeah.
And then like I spiral out and I don't do anything.
You're just like, I'm just gonna sit here because someone's gonna know how I'm doing what I'm doing, and I'm not gonna have to respond to it. Yeah, it's very true. So with all that, like, and obviously not having the spaces and the people you're used to being around, how has that changed what you're making and what you're doing?
I'm still like parsing that out. Like I think in like a year, I'll have a really good idea of like what this has done to my practice. And like in the middle of it, like it's so hard to see.
Yeah, to kind of step back and see it. And
because like I will like wait until like my partner leaves the house for a walk to make work, just so I can like think clearly. And like I do feel really privileged in some ways to like come from the making background that I have come from, because like it's taught me to be really like thrifty and crafty,
Yeah.
and like smart about how to make work with very few resources. Because coming from like a really small program in Kentucky, like if you wanted to make something work, like you had to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah.
And so this is like sort of familiar territory where I'm like, cool, like there are things that I need to do.
Yeah.
I have like no resources but lots of time. How do I like pull things together to make this happen? And like slowly but surely the work is like starting to happen.
Yeah.
In like really sort of vulnerable and scary ways, and in these sort of like stolen away moments when no one's looking.
Yeah.
Which is like a new tension in the work that I do think is really interesting to sort of like observe happening in myself.
Yeah. Does it make you reflect on your work when you like see the finished product a little bit more? As in like, do you see it differently than you saw the previous works because of the making process, or do you think that it still keeps that same type of like visual effects like as you did before?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a difference. I think the context shifts a lot, just because, you know, for the first 2 weeks I was horrified because I had nothing but time to like sit still and think about my thoughts and my feelings.
Yeah.
Which is like a nightmare to me.
That's terrifying.
Right. Fucking awful. And then like now that the work is sort of like coming out again and happening again, like it's, you know, connected to the work that happened before it. But especially in the photographs, I think there's sort of this like tension and anxiety that comes through in a way that they didn't have beforehand. Like there was sort of, in the work that was happening before the quarantine, a relaxation that I hadn't had in the work before, which was interesting in and of itself. But now there's sort of this like deep unease in the way the figures are reacting or interacting with each other.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting to me. And then seeing this new chlorophyll work start to simmer as well. I do think because it's like a reductive photographic process, like the sun is sort of eating the pigment, and there's a sense of loss in that.
Okay.
Which I think is really interesting as far as like an idea of grief goes. And to see that idea that I've been working towards for a year or more, like click together in a moment of like collective cultural grief.
Nice.
Is weird. And I don't know what all it has to say, but it's like neat to see it happening.
It's weird how it's something that wasn't really relevant, I guess, like internationally before. Your work has now been moving towards this kind of like isolation that you've always kind of done in your work beforehand. And now it's kind of like a more relevant situation of isolation. Yeah. And it's interesting to see how it's become a more relevant body of like work just in general.
Yeah, it's like having bought an underdog stock and all of a sudden like it shoots up in value and you're like, hey,
that toilet paper stock that you just
right. I was making work about cocoons in like 2015. Like,
yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Got shit to say now.
Just to dredge it all back up and just start pumping it out there, man.
Right.
So how are you doing personally? Like I know like you like have just moved to a new city, like you have changed your whole life situation in like the last 3 or 4 months, right? Really?
Yeah, so I spent like a year changing my whole life situation every 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
It's sort of like the year that's lost to time for me. Yeah, so I'm not doing poorly personally.
Good.
It's definitely, it's weird because this is honestly like the most stable I have felt in well over a year, just because like nothing's changing. Like for the first time I've spent like more than a month in the exact same place doing the exact same thing.
I mean, that's probably a good
yeah, but at the same time like the timing's fucking awful.
Yeah,
because like because I'm stable now, I have to like confront all this shit and like all of the feelings, etc., that like don't exist when you can just get in your car and like zoom away.
Oh yeah, when you're not busy, you have to sit down and take care of yourself, and it's a terrible thing you have to do.
Yeah. And like I don't remember who it was, but I was listening to a podcast interview with someone who was like, yeah, quarantine is super scary because like it's this horrific magnifying glass that distorts like all of your feelings into these giant awful things.
Yeah.
And like things that normally wouldn't bother you, like in relationships or in domestic spaces, are now like
The worst things ever.
yeah, just like these mind-bending, terrifying monsters that like you have to like talk out and be vulnerable to deal with. And I'm like, I'm tired.
Yeah.
I'm so tired.
It's weird how like the emotional tiredness beats the physical tiredness almost now. How it,
Yeah.
you know, before, I mean, it's always there, but it's not the main reason to just kind of,
Mhm.
yeah. So,
Yeah, it's super real. And like the parsing out like what's a trauma response from like this sort of like national upheaval and what's just like I'm tired because existing is hard, and what's I'm tired because like I've done nothing but like talk about my feelings all day.
yeah. And listen to people talk about theirs,
Right.
which is also,
Also exhausting.
yes, it is. So yeah, man. Man, Aaron, it was great talking to you, bud. Thank you so
Yeah,
much
you
for
too.
coming on and sharing your work with us and sharing like how you're doing with everything. Man, and I love to see your work and how it's going and where it's been going. And I can't wait to see more, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been really good.
Awesome, dude. I'm super glad you came on. All right,
Thanks.
I'm gonna stop it now.
Cool.